For many professional photographers, working to a brief is nothing new. But for those just starting their professional journey, the concept of working to a brief might seem a little overwhelming and intimidating. In this video, I'm going to explain what working to a brief means, show you some examples, and help you understand the process so that you are prepared for any future situation of commercial photography where working to a brief is necessary. I recently provided a challenge for our members on Karl Taylor Education, where I gave them a very specific advertising style brief to execute. This task provided an opportunity to experience what it's like to work to a set brief, to interpret mood boards and execute predetermined concepts. If you're not familiar with working to a brief, it's probably better to get it wrong with me on our platform than it is with the client. Some of them came very close to executing that brief, but many of them missed the target, and I actually discussed this with them in detail. Let's take a look now.
This is some of the complexities of composition and aesthetics, about how things marry together and how they feel like they should belong together. And these are all little psychological influencing factors in an image. But when you actually look at that image, you think, right, that apple on the left is either going to fall over, roll over, or is trying to run away, and the half apple looks like it's chasing it. This one, the lighting and the background and the angle of view and everything work well, but the foreground apple is a little bit bright. That is not on brief. Did I ask for some random bits of string or wool in the shot? No, I never asked for any random bits of string. It's clearly not in the drawing, it's clearly not in the sketch, it's clearly not in my video that I made. And to be honest, if I was working for an art director on campaigns like I've worked for FC UK, Red or Dead or Boss, and then I just decide, you know what, I'm going to just throw this, I don't know, random object like this pepper pot into your advertising shot just because I feel like it, I would be fired. This one is probably as far from the brief as it could be, unless it had a Toyota or a Lexus car parked in the background. Again, did any of that, or was any of that mentioned in this brief here? Is it in that drawing? I'm sorry, I can't see it. You might have been leaning that apple and going, oh, it keeps falling. You know what? I'm just going to prop it up at this angle because that stops it falling over. That does not work with an art director. Do you know what would have worked with the art director? Is knowing that you could just simply go in the cupboard, get a toothpick, ram the toothpick through the back of the back apple until it's stuck into the front apple and stopped it rolling over and got it at exactly the perfect angle. Why is this important? Because it forces you to think about how to solve the problems. And the minute you start thinking about how to solve the problems, rather than just giving up, when you start thinking about how to solve the problems, you start thinking like a real photographer, because that's what it really is about. It's about research, planning, solving problems, making things work.
Now, as you can see, many of them didn't hit the target exactly on the brief. But I'm sure now many of them understand the process of working to a brief much better, that they will get closer and closer to accurately executing future briefs that I set them. This is all explained in more detail in our business class, Working to a Brief, but I've also provided some information in this video that you might find useful. What is a brief in photography? A brief is a predetermined objective of the photo shoot that the client or art director requires. This can sometimes be as simple as a sketch and a few words, or often it can run to many pages with hundreds of examples of what needs to be achieved. When it comes to commercial photography, it is very common and desirable to receive a predetermined brief before the shoot, outlining the concept, the target market, and specific visuals required by the client. Depending on the type of work you're shooting, the brief may be more or less specific. For example, briefs for product advertising will likely be far more detailed than those for editorial or fashion images due to the fluidity in nature of those types of shoots. Typically, a good brief will detail everything from the mood and styling of a shot to the perspective, tone and contrast. This will be outlined through the use of mood boards and reference images, along with a written description of the concept and hopefully a high-quality sketch. What to expect when you receive your first brief? Before you receive a brief, you'll likely have an initial call or conversation with the art director or client. This will not only be to check your availability, but also to outline the concept, audiences, and goal for the campaign. At this point, you may be asked to sign an NDA, a non-disclosure agreement, as many of the items commercial photographers shoot are new to market or products that haven't been launched yet, and discretion is important. So don't worry about signing an NDA as long as you're sure that you're not going to blab down the pub and show all your friends on social media the photos of the latest gadget that's being released in 3 months' time. When dealing with advertising agencies, the concept will be fairly clear-cut, whereas with some smaller companies you may be called on to offer your thoughts on the brief. But keep in mind that this is not your idea and that the concept should have been carefully researched, thought through, and particularly designed to sell a product to a specific audience. Your job is to execute that idea and bring it to reality and utilize your skills in photography and lighting to bring the emotion of the brief and the overall concept to fruition. Many companies, big and small, conduct extensive research regarding their target market. Those creating the brief will have a clear idea of what exactly appeals to their customers and how best to convey this. Once you receive the brief, the next step is to make sure you clearly understand the concept and your role in the project. This might sound obvious, but it's an important point worth highlighting. As the photographer, your job is to bring the art director's vision to life. If you don't have a clear understanding of what they want, you will not be able to fully and accurately realize their ideas. If you have questions or are unsure about any aspect of a brief, then that is the time to ask questions. Rough sketches, mood boards, and reference images will usually be included with the brief, which should give you a good idea of what the client wants and any details about the different elements of the campaign. For example, some campaigns may include several other stages like post-production, CGI, or even video. If there's any phase of the project you don't understand or are uncertain about, make sure to talk to the art director or the client well before the start of the shoot. This often takes place in a meeting with them before the project commences. In some cases, for commercial projects, you may deal with the client directly. In these cases, especially if it's a smaller company, then they're not necessarily used to giving the direction to photographers, and you may have to consider some of the things that would normally be handled by the art director and do them yourself. In these cases, you should consider how and where the images will be used, what the layout will be, the brand guidelines, etc. Giving thought to each of these will not only help ensure you deliver the best image for your client, but also demonstrate a level of professionalism that your client will value. In fact, intentionally creating a brief for a client who isn't totally clear is a very good practice, as it ensures that you have something approved by the client in advance and will avoid a small client claiming that what you delivered wasn't what they wanted. Pricing, planning, and pre-shoot testing. Pricing is something that may already have been discussed in earlier communications, but until you've seen the full brief, it can be difficult to calculate a final cost. Once you have a clearer picture of what the project entails, you'll be better able to determine what to charge for the project. Planning and pre-shoot testing are two other important stages that come before the shoot day. When it comes to planning, the brief should act as your pre-visualization. This is something I often talk about in our classes on Carl Taylor Education. It's important to have a clear idea of how the shoot will proceed and what obstacles might lay in the way. Make sure you have everything that you need before the day. For example, you may need a background of a certain colour, so make sure you have that ready for the shoot. You may need specific props or outfits or a small set built, so there's also need to organise these things in advance. Pre-shoot testing is another factor to consider, both for the pricing and planning of the job. With many of my long-standing clients, I no longer do pre-test shooting because I'm already familiar with their preferred style. However, if it is a complex or new concept, I may take half a day to run through the basics of the shoot to ensure that everything runs smoothly on the day. This is something that both advertising photographer Jonathan Knowles and liquid specialist David Lund and Barry Macario discuss in their live show talks with me on Carl Taylor Education. The day of the shoot. On the day of the shoot, the art director will often be with you in the studio to oversee the shoot. Sometimes a representation from the client will be there too. Having the brief along with mood boards and reference images on hand to refer to throughout the shoot is necessary. This will allow you to check and make sure you're on track and don't forget anything. It also ensures that the art director doesn't decide to change direction partway through the shoot when you've already worked out everything for the existing brief. If the shoot comprises of multiple stages or elements, it can be a good idea to have a shot list too, to ensure that you don't miss anything. If there is no one with you on the day of the shoot, you may be expected to send JPEG preview files through to the relevant people at regular intervals throughout the shoot for them to keep up to date with the progress and check that what you're doing is what they had in mind. I have the ability to live link a video feed to my clients so that they can see the shoot remotely if necessary, and that may become a more common practice with increased travel restrictions from any existing or future pandemics. If it is just the photographic elements that fall to you for the shoot, once the shoot is complete and the director is happy with the images, the next step is to deliver the images they need. If you are also doing the retouching, you will have to confirm which images the client wants to be retouched and when the deadline is for the delivery of the final images. The key thing when working to a brief is to remember that your role as the photographer is to bring the art director or client's vision to life. Often it is less about your own creativity and more about your skills as a problem solver that will help you deliver the desired images. Finally, don't fear a brief. They are there to make everyone's life easier and to ensure everyone is working towards the same common goal. A good brief helps you visualize the mood and lighting and understand the specific composition necessary for the shot, so that the copy and logos can be placed correctly. It also provides you with an excellent level of protection because the brief can serve as evidence that you executed exactly what was required of you, even if the campaign is ultimately not a success for the client. 90% of all advertising photographers' work is done to a brief. So if you're not currently familiar with this process and you'd like to learn, then you might like to try some of our brief challenges that I set on Carl Taylor Education. I hope you found this useful. Give us a thumbs up and thanks for watching.
Get my completely free photography course with no sign up required. You can also access our free 90-page ebook. Just click the link or go to carltayloreducation.com.